All right, BC. So, were you more surprised that he went in depth with the running backs? Kind of it was solicited, but a little unsolicited with the adjectives or the D line going back and kind of showing a new level of excitement after a couple of weeks ago talking about what they had lost, and were we appreciative enough?
Probably the running backs, but it makes sense to me why he would say that. One, he I think believes it, but also it's good for those guys to hear that. I think too, like in a setting like that, that the head coach believes that guys are right here in this room that can produce, because there is going to be that outside conversation when people are like, well, what could they still get out there, and I'm one of them. And then you're like, well, maybe a running back, I don't know, D lineman, you throw that out there, and that's sort of the conversation that spins in the wind. So I think it's useful for that room when the head man like resets that conversation a bit, is like, no, I still believe in Kwinton Ives, just like I've said like 4 or 5 times up here. Mekhi Nelson, by the way, almost played last year, and he listed off reasons they're really impressed with him. I know you are too, Damon, that you saw some things in him to like. Uh, and then obviously you got the young guys, and it sounds like Jamarian Parker going from like 175 to 190, in his first couple months has really taken their, yeah, nutrition and strength and all that. And Connor Booth is, one of the best athletes in the class. So I like that he bolstered belief in that group going into spring, and we'll see how it goes. He said right now that it's not a position where I think we have to make a move or anything. We've got the guys basically. And I always go back to the bowl game, and we always say on here, Holgerson's a guy we think just shoots it straight. And he had that quote. He's like, number 28 is doing some things these first 8 practices. He's looked really great. And that has always stuck in my head, that I didn't think Holgerson just said that to say it.
I wanted it to be the other number 28, and then I realized he was wearing 35, so he rained on my parade. No, I'm kidding. Well, along those lines, B, did you get the sense, and as the question asker, did you get the sense that we just assumed that Emmett was the set apart, and then it was everybody else, or kind of what was your feel as that question's being, or as he's answering the question?
My feel was the question, and everyone on the outside looking in is looking at it as there's RB1, and it needs a complement to it. It needs the second and third punches. And I don't know that they think differently about that, but it is important that they get those, 3 to 4 guys you feel really good about. And that second guy, if Emmett, has the same attitude that he's had, and hunger when he wasn't the guy, when he was chasing, now that he's the guy being chased, I like a lot of what Emmett could do as the top guy, but you do want that alternate that can give you something. And they had a little bit of that with Dell. And, we'll see. I do think, Kwinton, I know, had a nice kick return in one of the games. They're getting blown out at Indiana, so people didn't pay much attention to it. But he has always been someone that this staff has stood by and said, he can play. We really think he can play. And I know some people have thought that's just coach speak, but they've said it enough that I don't think so. And it is interesting. He's up to 210 pounds. So he's done some work with his body too.
BC, we've talked a lot about, just in general and this morning, about guys and how they kind of have to endure all the other stuff to be able to get to play and have the ability to get on the field. How much when you think he's talking about whether it's a Kwinton Ives or like an Elijah Judy or guys that at some point or another have gotten brought up multiple times about, oh, we think this guy can really play. How much of it is telling us sort of the situation in each room versus reminding those guys publicly that, hey, if you do the things we ask of you, we really believe you can be good?
I think the second part's really important. Not that they don't say that in the meeting rooms and stuff like that, but I think there is something to be said for when it gets said publicly. And then it's out in the headlines, and then the next, day, people are talking like this about, like, what, maybe they do have the guys over there to get it done. And it reshapes the conversation a little bit. And those guys can't help but catch wind of all the talk that's out there. Like D linemen, I'm sure, are aware that like in all the spring capsule type stories, they get labeled as sort of like a question mark. How do they replace the cheat code, tie and stuff like that? And so I think it's useful to them. Like, hey, we believe in you. Look at, like he mentioned in Judy's case, this is a guy who's gone from 270-ish to like 300 pounds now. He's worked hard to change his body. I know that he was making progress last year. And I do think, to your question, Ravi, we have to remind ourselves sometimes every guy's dealing with something we don't even know about that's not football related. That factors into this too. Not a bad thing in Elijah's case, but it's a public thing, so I feel comfortable talking about it. I mean, he had a young son, that first year he was on campus, and so that's a big life adjustment, and he gets used to that. And I just think sometimes we can lose sight of some of that stuff that's going on too. So you got to always remind yourself. Maybe I don't know the full story on why some guys wasn't heard from as much this season. There's a lot of other things going on, so. You got to always at least keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, BC, because I think that's, people always ask me all over the place. Doesn't matter what, you one of the few guys that you were in on early. Like, I think I liked, there were these little things that I liked about Coach Rhule that I think kind of helped develop the man crush. And almost none of it had to do with football. It was this weird thing about how, if you're around him for 15 or 20 minutes or however long, you left and you're like, man, I probably got to be better. Or that guy doesn't cheat the 24 hours in the day, right? He maximizes the time in the day. Or my favorite kind of what he's been talking about is there's this weird thing, and I think if the guys get it, they could really take off. There's so much more to the game that has to do with just attacking life. And the sooner you guys learn to equate the two, the better off you're gonna be. Like that holistic approach he has to young men being functional men is fascinating, right? Where I just want to get Tommy Hill to, pro workouts, or I want to see Bullock have the opportunity to succeed, or I want these seniors to get the monkey off their back, or I really like Marquise Buford because he just this holistic approach to complete people, not just players. I think that's the thing that I love the most.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yesterday, I don't know that a lot of people see it. There's probably a video of it somewhere. MJ Sherman did an interview after his pro day workout, and I always enjoyed his insights while he was here. And he had some funny, but I mean, it is just interesting. Like he said, I never would have thought of coming to Nebraska at like age 18. It's just funny how life works. I ended up here. And he said, I thank God for Coach Rhule and the staff, and just like the tough stuff they put me through a little bit, like the mat drills and some of that. Like when he was training for pro day, when he felt like he was in a rut, he'd think like, oh, at least it's not mat drills, like, so I mean, when you hear him, like he said that sort of last year when he was a senior, but still talking about it and sort of the reverence he has for like the dedication that it takes in Rhule's program, but also how it builds you up and helps you in other endeavors like what he's going through now. It was really, I thought, insightful and interesting. So people might look for that, but yeah, I think that kind of connects to what you're saying.
Appreciated too, BC.
Yeah, he probably was.
He played well last year. He did a lot of little things that didn't show up on the stat sheet.
I mean, when you hear him, when you hear Spindler, go and Dane Key and McCullough go up like a week or two ago and say those mat drills, like I haven't seen anything like that. Like, I mean, that's just a piece of it, but it gives you an idea that the guys who, as Rocco said in that interview, the guys who are going to be on the 105, they're going to be a good 105 because they would have gone through all this. And so it's a really fascinating story we have right in front of us, and we can't lose sight of it. I do feel a little bit like Rhule's, even though he's adapting to what's going on, but he's still keeping his tenets of we are going to develop guys, and in that third year of like they're building up their body and stuff, it's going to pop. And I'm not saying that's not happening elsewhere, but I do think there's a trust in it here still in Rhule's staff that maybe isn't everywhere. And it's going to be interesting if it does work. Like if you can get those guys, they stick around. Let's say like Kwinton Ives does pop this year. That's a case where, let's be honest, in this day and age, a lot of times you wouldn't have a running back for that third year to see what he can do, but maybe it does take off. And some of these linemen, as he said the other day, like they beat out a lot of people for like Bricks and Tamua. This is, you just got to keep building them and hope those guys have patience with it, because they can still be something really impressive in this program. And so I'm just kind of intrigued by they're adapting, but yet it's still that building development process that's key to everything.
Yeah, BC, there's a lot in there. And part of me, I go to these guys that, obviously everyone wants to play early, right? And a lot of times with linemen, especially, most of them aren't ready to play early, not at a high level and not in a place where they can be highly successful. And part of it is like, I just really appreciate the trust that they've been able to build with these guys, because, Grant Bricks, when he's going through his recruiting process, everybody's telling him like, oh, I'm sure we can get you on the field early and all this, where that might be what you want, but it might not be what's best for you. You know what I mean? Like, especially as a lineman, how many times have we seen guys get put out there too early? We worried about it with Gunnar Gatula last year, right? Where you go, hey, are we putting him in a position to be successful with putting him out there probably a year before they wanted to? Like, when you see things like that work out, how much do you think that impacts younger classes building that trust in the coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be pretty critical to have those examples in front of you. And that's why I think Rocco Spindler's a nice addition too, is because if you look at what happened to him at Notre Dame, he played like 20 snaps his first 2 years. He was a 4-star guy. And so he's an example of someone who had to sort of wait his turn. But with this too, I mean, there are those guys, they show willingness too. Like if we think that you have bumped ahead of somebody, or at least into a position where we can play you, like Willis McGahee last year played and Keona Davis played, and that we're talking D-line type there, but they have shown that part too. Like they will get some young guys on the field, but to your point, I do think it is really important, probably an underrated aspect, to have a few examples in front of you. Look, this guy didn't get it right away. Emmett Johnson didn't get it right away. Like he had to battle his way up to the top. I mean, I remember 2 years ago going into that season, Rhule liked him, but he was like 4th or 5th when the season started, and he kept going and going. There's some injuries here and there, but he took advantage. And so guys look at stuff like that and going to say that could be me too.
I thought was interesting, kind of going back to Coach Rhule and this evolution as like the overseer. I thought it was interesting. He pulled kind of this, there's disciplinarians, and some people, he or she will like yell at you. Some kind of give you the look. Everybody kind of has different styles. Yesterday was the first time there was kind of this, I don't know if admonish is the word. The whole Dylan thing with the question, and it didn't like how some of the media handled it. It was a new wrinkle for me to watch him show disappointment without really going into chastising or kind of being as condescending. And I felt like it was still equally as powerful. Like it forced us to think like, man, did we need to do better? Like that hurt him a little bit, because that was the demeanor that he kind of showed, is that it hurt him a little bit.
It was like the dad, like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
Yeah, I thought it was powerful, and it was kind of it was new for him.
Yeah. A little bit of that. I don't know. I don't see everything that's out there that got put out, so I don't know how everybody presented it. I remember going on your show the morning after that, and you mentioned it was a topic, and I didn't even actually think of it that way at the time. So I didn't know it had traveled as much as it did, or it was like a big discussion point. I guess I had my head in the sand on that one, but
I told the same thing. He brought it up to me, and I was like, no. And then we went through. I mean, he He wasn't.
Here's the thing. The reason I guess I didn't think of it on the spot was he had been on the McAfee show at the combine and he had used the same numbers just as an example. Like you can't do it at 240. So I just took it as like he's just using those numbers. Like this is the example, of. But anyway, yeah, I think there was some of that. And also the key part within that probably was him saying I basically think about everything I say up here to a degree, like there's a reason it's said a certain way. And I wouldn't have put it that way. So yeah, it's something to think about. And I'm always processing that I try to, he's an interesting coach to cover because his thoughts, and this is a compliment to him, are so long sometimes. Like you do a disservice actually if you cut up his quotes and then you sort of have your segues in there. You almost like have to let quotes go for a while to let the whole thought play out. So that's just an interesting dynamic of covering them too.
Yeah, Shane certainly feels that that struggle with trying to cut all the Rhule audio. But I do wonder as we kind of listened to him, and it sounded like he was when kind of in that Rhule answer or in the Rail answer, it sounded like he kind of gave us permission to just be like, hey, what I'm telling you is exactly what I mean. So just take me at my word. Because I think a lot of this has been, we kind of parse through and try and
we've had the conversations too, guys, where we say we're just not used to somebody just telling us.
Yeah.
So we even parse through that.
But I mean, he kind of like, hey, I say things in a specific way for a specific reason. I'm pretty intentional about that. So like, just trust me when just trust what I'm saying.
Well, you could take that to he just brought up Kwinton Ives like 5 times, like that he believes that he's a good player, and that's one of those where people are like, okay, whatever. And he said it again yesterday. So to your point, I think he is someone who he's not going to say it just to say it, or he's not going to mention a player just to pat him on the back for no reason. So that's something that has to be noted, I think, going forward.
BC, when you're let's say you get dropped in, right? You've heard now, you've got a couple of days under your belt, and then we get what he said yesterday. Would the position group, if you only got one that you got to go watch, has it changed from pre-spring to anything that's been said yesterday or kind of as you put pen to paper with returning guys, or is that position group still the same?
I think it's the same. The defensive line, I think was before the spring and still is. I think that's a fascinating conversation too, because I understand where when you look at it on paper, and I've said, last year's group kind of applied to that get old, stay old mantra, and this group isn't like that. But so there's kind of that doubt, like, okay, are these guys actually ready for the show? But then I think back to like 2 years ago, and we actually had a very similar offseason conversation about that D line before it happened, because Nash had been kind of a fringe player and Ty hadn't really taken off like the Ty we knew his senior year at that point. And so there were doubts and there was some worries about like some guys that people can't even remember their names that like went in the portal that offseason. People forget about. So I take like, okay, I think that this group like has some questions that they have to answer. It's a challenge, but I also look at Rhule's full resume as a head coach and even a position coach. And the one position group where I would say you would probably nod your head that he's been like, it's always been pretty stout, is defensive line. And so it kind of pushes back on that idea, like when you have your doubts about it. So all that to say, that's why I'd want to go watch them and just see like where some of those guys are at, how they're developing. And of course, as a layman, I probably wouldn't know some of what I was seeing if it was real progress or not. But that would be my first group.
BC, as we kind of get into the very start of spring here, from now versus, and I understand the roster is still going to change a little bit, but from now versus 4 months ago when the season ended with the Pinstripe Bowl, do you think the roster is better today than it was in December?
Yeah, I do. I say it with some hesitancy because there are some guys that I really respected that you have to replace, but I always think of the old scene in Friday Night Lights where Billy Bob's taking the pieces off the board and putting up new names. And that's a little bit what Rhule was saying the other day. Like, that's what football is. Like, you fall sort of in love with certain names because you followed them for so long and you've written so many stories about them. And there's new guys that you recruited for a reason and they're here for a reason and you believe that they can produce. But another thing that Rhule has said, if we're talking about just saying, okay, he's not going to say it just to say it. He thinks there's more talent over there. I mean, he's been on the record with that. And I like some of the ways that they can maybe find that talent in different aspects. Like Mike Eckler as an evaluator, I think with special teams might be a new eye that brings something out of a guy. He mentioned Bryce Turner like a week or two ago, like seeing something in him. And so I think there could be examples like that. I like that they're saying, let's find what a guy can do, not what he can't do. And I think with that, even if the talent were equal, if you're able to accentuate guys' best assets better this year, just a little better than last year, it'll look like they're more talented, even if it's a wash, so that's part of like coaching and developing too. But I like their mindset about that. And I do think they have some good evaluators. And I'm really interested in the Eckler piece, how he can work different guys into that system and get them involved. And then that builds confidence for them to get to the 2 deep at some point.
I wonder if we could get back. You know what I hope, since you bring up Eckler, I hope we get back to the guys chomping at the bit to play special teams because, I mean, that's the ticket, right? Like, I want to be seen. You heard Eck talk about different skill sets needed if you're a wide receiver that are portable or a DB or a linebacker. And we've seen a couple of guys that are playing in this defense currently that started out because they got noticed on special teams. I hope they get to the point where guys are like, man, I want on, right? I want on these special forces just because I want to do the darn thing.
Yeah, I think that's a big storyline because also just think about that if like that unit really gets humming and you're part of it, and when we get to the season and that feeling's in the air and you're involved, like you're not just someone sitting on the sideline, you're in that unit that's making a difference, that's changing the game. And even if you are second or third team at your position at that point, you're excited about it. Not to butter you up, Damon, but I watch old games all the time. And I mean, I've seen you pop up on like special teams. I think you had like almost a forced fumble against Kansas State, like in a game Eckler was playing in Manhattan, something like that. I mean, guys wanted to be on it and they made plays and they earned their stripes doing it. So I hope that's the attitude over there. And I kind of feel like this is not knocking what's been. It's just looking ahead. I just looking at Eckler's track record and how he got guys at Tennessee to buy into that who weren't starters on that team tells me that he's got a pretty good way of communicating and getting guys to kind of go with that.
That's our guy, Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, we appreciate the time. As always, we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for having me, guys.